it is really complex. It sounds really good, but there's no way I could condense it into this single recording. Suffice to say, um, there were themes such as angels versus demons, hero worship. At one point, Supergirl found that there was a church named in her honor. She would interact with her ex-boyfriend, Buzz, who would become a demonic being and later a, a normal human. And then I want to say, even in the end, he became an angelic being himself. I may not be right on that. And I'll admit fully that I have not read all 80 issues of the Peter David run. So I did have to do some Cole's Notes type research for this episode. Basically, the next big status quo change for Supergirl came with issue number 50, in which Matrix, who was seemingly a part of Supergirl, an inseparable part of Supergirl, was actually physically ripped apart from Linda. And Matrix ended up carrying the Earthborn Angel of Fire power set with her, leaving Linda Danvers largely depowered. She was still quite strong, probably faster than the average human, but not super fast. She could not fly. She could leap an eighth of a mile. So really harkening back to the Golden Age Superman, or the Superman of Earth 2. Her chameleon power was completely gone. So now Linda Danvers knew that if she was going to continue her career as Supergirl, there's no way that she could change her facial features when she went out in public as Supergirl. Of course, she could not change her hair color back and forth anymore. So now she had to wear a blonde wig when she went out as Supergirl. And to represent this major change in her status quo, Linda would redesign the costume. It would consist of a midriff-bearing white t-shirt that had the S shield on the front, a body-hugging blue miniskirt, red boots that tied up at the front. She had white gloves, as well as the classic red cape. And of course, with her entirely new look, she had to convince everybody, including members of the hero community, that she was the one true Supergirl, and she had been Supergirl for all this time. But something major had happened to her, and so physically she looked different, but she was still the Supergirl that everybody knew. And so that was quite interesting, seeing Post-Crisis Supergirl now purely as Linda Danvers with a modified power set. At around somewhere in the first half of the 70s in the Peter David run, I want to say, there was a whole story where Linda Danvers as Supergirl and Mary Marvel, they met up with Matrix, who was continuing in the role of the Earthborn Angel of Flame. They also came into conflict with one other angelic being. Basically, what happened in the end was that Matrix continued to be the Earthborn Angel of Fire, but a number of her old Supergirl powers were transferred back into Linda. So Linda still didn't have the chameleon power, so she couldn't morph her facial features back and forth. And she decided to keep the costume that she had been wearing since around issue 50, but she was very relieved to find that her strength had been upped several levels. She was super fast again. She could fly again, and she had her telekinetic powers back. And so this led into the final arc on the Peter David run. It's long out of print, but thank goodness it's all on Comixology because it's a really wonderful story. It's called Many Happy Returns. And in an interview, Peter David said that he did have plans for the book going past issue number 80. However, sales on the book were declining to the point where DC said, okay, well, this is it. This is the final arc. We're pulling the plug. But the plan that David had was really interesting. And you can read about it online, but I'll tell it to you here. David's idea was that the book would turn into a book that could be called Blonde Justice. And it would be a Birds of Prey style book. It would feature Linda Danvers continuing her career as Superwoman, for lack of a better superhero ID. Kara Zor-El will be brought back in to the DCU, and she would be Supergirl, and Power Girl would also join the book as a third member, which would have been really interesting because you would have had a Supergirl-centric book featuring 3 separate versions of Supergirl, because of course Power Girl was originally the Earth 2 cousin of Superman. But that didn't work out. In fact, looking at the color scheme on Linda Danvers' Supergirl costume, starting with issue 50 or 51, the white t-shirt and the blue skirt, the gloves, and the red cape, it actually looked kind of like a Power Girl type costume in terms of the layout of the colors. Power Girl would not show up in Many Happy Returns, but here's what did happen in Many Happy Returns. It opened with Linda Danvers being really happy that her powers are back to full. But then she came back to Leesburg where she saw a rocket had crashed, and the rocket opened and out popped a very young, probably a 15-year-old Kara Zor-El from the pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths reality, wearing her original Supergirl costume as it appeared decades ago in the Silver Age. Of course, there was that almost requisite misunderstanding between the two, but after a short scuffle, both Supergirls would end up becoming friends, with the somewhat older Linda becoming a mentor to the younger Kara. But of course, readers had to know that it wouldn't last forever, and indeed it didn't, because the Hal Jordan hosted Spectre would appear, and Spectre was all too honest, and unfortunately, he didn't think better to tell the pre-crisis Kara to cover her ears, as he explained that in the pre-crisis reality, Kara Zor-El would become a great hero, but she would die tragically in an event known as Crisis on Infinite Earths. And knowing that she was destined to die deeply traumatized Kara Zor-El. I mean, why not? Imagine being 15, being told, hey, you're going to die in a pretty heroic yet pretty brutal fashion. She was terrified. So what Linda did was she decided to cheat. The Spectre had said that he needed Kara to go back to the pre-crisis reality so that history would unfold as it was supposed to, so that the pre-crisis reality would come to an end, but the post-crisis reality would be born. Just as an aside, this was something really nice for fans, getting an acknowledgement that Crisis on Infinite Earths, as it happened in the comics in 1986, actually did happen in the post-crisis reality. Immediately after Crisis on Infinite Earths, there was the two-part history of the DC Universe by Marv Wolfman and George Perez, where it was explained that the crisis happened, but it was a crisis which took place on one single universe, and it was more like a crisis in time, really. But here it was nice, this acknowledgement that there was a pre-crisis reality that did happen, and it couldn't be ignored because the post-crisis reality came out of the pre-crisis reality. Okay, putting that aside, Linda decided there was no way that she was going to tell this innocent girl to go home and eventually face her maker. So what Linda did was she got into Kara's rocket, managed to pilot it into the pre-crisis reality, such that Kara Zor-El of the pre-crisis reality would become the new Supergirl of the post-crisis reality. And it was interesting to see what happened in the pre-crisis reality, because the rocket would land and be intercepted by Superman. Linda did her able best to convince the pre-crisis Superman that she was his cousin, a fellow survivor of Krypton's destruction. But over time, pre-crisis Superman would reveal to Linda that he knew that she was not telling the truth. Certain things that she said didn't jive with his understanding of pre-crisis history. The fact that she was wearing a costume that was made out of completely earthborn materials also clued him in right from the beginning. But he kept quiet because he realized that she was a good person, and by golly, as the years passed, he fell in love with her. And so the pre-crisis Superman and the Linda Danvers Supergirl married and would have a child, Ariella. Well, none of this sat well with the Spectre. And being the Spectre, he was able to cross over into the pre-crisis reality where he raged against Linda for what she had done. And now, given what we know about Parallax and Hal Jordan today, using things like Green Lantern Rebirth, we can explain Spectre's rage against Linda as an early example of Hal Jordan losing his control over the Spectre, as Parallax, who was still infesting Hal's soul, was gaining greater power and was taking greater dominance over both Hal and the Spectre. So you could say it was more than just the Spectre being angry that his will and the will of the Presence had been denied by Linda Danvers. He was very angry because he said the reason why Kara needs to return to this reality is that there is a being who hates Supergirl, and he is after her now. He broke the binds of reality and brought her to the post-crisis reality in the first place so that he could take her. And now you've left her out in the open. Yeah, she's going to die, but if you don't send her back now, not only will she die in the post-crisis reality, but all of reality will be destroyed. And so Linda now had to do the unfathomable. She had to go back to her reality and tell Kara Zor-El that she had to go back to her reality and face the fact that in years' time she would die in battle with the Anti-Monitor.